In June 1944, as Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, one machine made the impossible possible, a flat-bottomed wooden vessel with a steel ramp at its bow. It was not fast, armored, or elegant, but it carried armies through surf and gunfire onto the enemy's shore. Its official name was LCVP, Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel, but history remembers it as the Higgins Boat, after its inventor Andrew Jackson Higgins. It was the boat that opened a continent. Before its arrival, amphibious warfare was a logistical nightmare. The U.S. Navy lacked a vessel that could land men and vehicles directly onto a hostile beach. Traditional landing craft forced troops to jump overboard into deep water, often drowning under heavy packs or enemy fire. Higgins, a boat builder from New Orleans who specialized in shallow draft swamp craft, had already solved a similar problem for Louisiana's marshes, how to move heavy loads through water only a few feet deep. His design used a flat bottom, a protected propeller, and a steel ramp that dropped to unload cargo directly onto shore. When the Marines tested it in 1941, they realized it was the missing piece of modern invasion warfare. The ramp allowed men, jeeps, and supplies to exit in seconds. Higgins modified his swamp boat into a military workhorse, 36 feet long, powered by a diesel engine, carrying 36 soldiers or a 3-ton vehicle. It could operate in just 18 inches of water and back away from the beach without grounding. Its hull was made of simple plywood and steel fittings, cheap, fast to build, and easy to repair. By the time America entered the war, Higgins Industries had turned its small New Orleans workshop into a vast production empire. Using a network of subcontractors and assembly lines, Higgins employed over 20,000 workers, welders, carpenters, and engineers, including many women and black laborers, at a time when segregation was still law in much of the country. His shipyards became one of the first fully integrated workplaces in America. Efficiency was his weapon. He built boats faster than the military could request them. The Higgins boat soon became the backbone of every Allied amphibious operation. In the Pacific, it carried Marines ashore at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima. In North Africa and Sicily, it delivered troops under fire against fortified beaches. And on D-Day, more than 1,000 Higgins boats led the assault on Normandy. Each wave of gray ramps opening on the sand became the living symbol of invasion itself. The boat's design proved so simple and effective that it required almost no modification throughout the war. Soldiers called it the wooden wonder. Commanders called it indispensable. It allowed generals to plan operations that had once been unthinkable, not just to attack ports, but to create ports anywhere by force. The Higgins boat turned geography itself into a weapon. Dwight D. Eisenhower later said that without Andrew Higgins, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different. What he meant was that Higgins didn't just build boats. He built mobility. He turned coastlines from barriers into gateways, giving the Allies the power to strike anywhere, at any time. When the war ended, nearly 23,000 Higgins boats had been built. They carried not only men and vehicles, but the very concept of industrial improvisation, a simple, functional design mass-produced into strategic advantage. The Higgins boat was never meant to be heroic. It was a box with an engine and a ramp. But in its simplicity lay genius. It was the bridge between sea and land, between industry and victory. Every landing, every liberated city, every step taken toward Berlin and Tokyo began with its steel ramp hitting sand. The story of the Higgins boat was as much about invention as it was about transformation, of technology, labor, and the very concept of amphibious war. Andrew Jackson Higgins was not a naval officer or a government engineer. He was a civilian entrepreneur from Louisiana who built workboats for oilmen and loggers. His shallow draft boats were designed for speed through bayous and swamps, not battlefields. Yet his stubborn belief in practicality over bureaucracy forced the U.S. military to rethink its entire approach to landing operations. When the Navy first tested his designs in the late 1930s, officials dismissed them as too unconventional. Naval doctrine favored large landing barges and heavy steel craft, not plywood boats. Higgins fought back, arranging his own demonstrations. He invited officers to New Orleans, drove his boat straight up onto the Mississippi mudbanks, unloaded cargo, and backed out again. The skeptics had no counter-argument. His boat worked. The Marines saw its potential first, and by 1940 they had convinced Washington to fund prototypes. Within a year, the LCVP had become standard issue. Higgins's genius lay not only in the design, but in his method of production. He approached boat building like automobile manufacturing, modular, fast, and decentralized. He recruited from everywhere, carpenters, dock workers, mechanics, and housewives. In his yards, women assembled hull frames and engines, while black craftsmen and engineers held supervisory roles rare for the time. "The only color that counts here," Higgins famously said, "is the color of production." His yards became a social revolution wrapped in steel and wood. The boats themselves reflected the same philosophy: simplicity, efficiency, reliability. Each one used standardized components and minimal materials. Plywood for the hull, mild steel for the ramp, and a single diesel engine meant rapid repair and low cost. They were designed to be expendable. If a boat made it through a few landings, it had already earned its worth. Crews learned to maintain them with basic tools, sometimes patching bullet holes with tin and nails between assaults. Combat proved their worth beyond any expectation. In the Pacific, Higgins boats became the spearhead of island hopping, carrying troops onto beaches where no port existed. They faced coral reefs, surf, and machine gun fire, yet kept coming. The ability to unload vehicles directly onto land allowed engineers to build airstrips and supply bases within hours. Each landing tightened the noose around Japan's empire. In the Mediterranean, the same craft delivered troops during Operation Torch. Sicily and Salerno, testing the concept that would culminate in Normandy. At Omaha Beach, under the storm of artillery and gunfire, Higgins boats kept moving. Waves of them approached through the surf, their ramps slamming down into chaos as soldiers leapt into the water and sand. Many were destroyed within minutes, but more came behind them, line after line, hour after hour. By the end of D-Day, nearly every soldier who stepped onto the French coast had done so from a Higgins boat. The invasion that freed Europe had ridden on Louisiana wood. Behind those landings was an industrial miracle. Higgins's factories produced more than 20,000 landing craft of various models, LCVPs, LCMs, and PT boats, at a pace no traditional shipyard could match. Every 30 minutes, another boat rolled out of his assembly lines. His success was so complete that the Navy admitted its own shipyards could not compete with his methods. Eisenhower, Churchill, and Roosevelt all credited him personally for giving the Allies the means to cross oceans and break fortresses. The war had many generals, but only one boat builder changed its geography. By 1945, the Higgins boat had become more than a machine. It was a doctrine. Every major Allied invasion, from North Africa to the Philippines, depended on its design. Its flat hull, retractable ramp, and shallow draft allowed entire armies to bypass ports, strike at will, and establish beachheads where the enemy least expected. The war that had once been bound by geography was now mobile, amphibious, and unpredictable, and that transformation began in a New Orleans workshop. The scale of production was staggering. Over 23,000 Higgins boats were built during the war, each one stamped with the same simple purpose: carry men and vehicles from ship to shore, no matter the cost. They came off assembly lines faster than any other craft of the war, built not by naval shipwrights but by ordinary Americans, women, black laborers, and unskilled workers trained on the job. The Higgins Industries workforce reflected the democratic ideal it was fighting for: inclusion, equality, and unity in pursuit of a single goal: output. The boats themselves became icons of industrial minimalism. They were not elegant or comfortable, but every detail served function. The ramp was designed to drop in under 2 seconds. The hull could scrape through surf and coral without splitting. Even if damaged, the craft could limp back to its transport for repairs. They could carry 36 men, a jeep, or small artillery pieces. When massed together in formation, they turned an ocean into a road, an assembly line delivering freedom, one wave at a time. Their psychological impact was immense. Soldiers remembered the deafening engines, the salt spray, the ramp slamming open, and the sudden chaos of beach landings. To many, that moment, the drop of the ramp, defined their entire war. It was the point where planning met reality, where steel and human will collided with fire. The Higgins boat was both vehicle and threshold, the last place of safety before war and the first step into history. Even after the war, the Higgins design continued to shape military thinking. Its descendants became the blueprint for every modern landing craft, from Korea to Vietnam, from the Falklands to the Persian Gulf. The concept of modular amphibious transport, conceived in Louisiana's swamps, became a permanent pillar of military logistics. The idea that an army could create its own port, anywhere on Earth, redefined strategic mobility for generations. Andrew Higgins himself returned to civilian life without fanfare. He built pleasure boats, experimented with high-speed designs, and continued to advocate for racial integration in industry. But his wartime legacy endured. Eisenhower's words, "He is the man who won the war for us," were not exaggeration. Without Higgins's boats, there could have been no Normandy, no island landings, no Allied advance across two oceans. Today, a few surviving Higgins boats rest in museums, their wooden hulls weathered but intact. Visitors walk their decks and see simplicity, planks, bolts, an engine, a ramp. Yet in that simplicity lies one of the greatest military innovations of the 20th century. The Higgins boat turned oceans into pathways and beaches into gateways. It was the vessel that carried the free world to victory, built not for glory, but for purpose. A boat that did not conquer by power, but by access. The craft that opened a continent, one landing at a time. When war began, Britain was starving. German U-boats hunted Allied convoys across the Atlantic, sinking ships faster than they could be built. Food, fuel, and weapons never reached their destinations. The solution would not come from new weapons or tactics, but from industrial engineering on an unprecedented scale. Ships that could be built faster than the enemy could destroy them. They were called Liberty ships, and they changed the economics of war. Before 1941, shipbuilding was slow and artisanal. Each vessel took nearly a year to construct, crafted by skilled shipwrights using riveted steel plates. America's challenge was to turn this craft into a factory process. Under the U.S. Maritime Commission, and driven by industrialist Henry J. Kaiser, the United States built a new kind of shipyard, one based on assembly lines, prefabrication, and unskilled labor. Sections of ships were welded rather than riveted, assembled in parallel, and joined like pieces of a machine. The first Liberty ships were modest, 441-foot cargo vessels designed to carry about 10,000 tons. Their design emphasized simplicity over beauty. They were slow, noisy, and unglamorous, but they could carry everything: tanks, planes, ammunition, grain, even entire locomotives. Each ship was identical, allowing interchangeable parts and rapid assembly. For the first time in history, ships were built like cars. The results were astonishing. In 1941, a Liberty ship took about 230 days to build. By 1943, that time had fallen to less than 45 days. The record was set by the Robert E. Peary, assembled in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Shipyards worked around the clock, employing hundreds of thousands of men and women, many of whom had never worked near the sea before. Welders, steel cutters, and crane operators replaced traditional craftsmen. The shipyards themselves became models of wartime efficiency, combining engineering precision with industrial speed. The Liberty ship program became a logistical miracle. Over 2,700 were built during the war, more tonnage than all Axis powers combined could sink in a year. They formed the backbone of Allied supply, carrying 75% of all cargo across the Atlantic and Pacific. Every major campaign, from North Africa to Normandy, relied on their cargo holds. When the Red Army advanced westward, it was Liberty ships that delivered American food, trucks, and fuel through the Arctic convoys to Murmansk. They were not perfect. Welded hulls occasionally cracked in cold seas, earning them the grim nickname Kaiser's coffins. Yet their losses were acceptable compared to their output. Each Liberty ship cost less than $2 million, cheap enough that replacing one was faster than repairing it. Their very disposability became their strength. By 1945, Liberty ships symbolized the industrial power that defined America's role in the war. They demonstrated that mass production could defeat scarcity, that speed could outweigh precision, and that logistics could win where weapons could not. When the war ended, hundreds of them continued to sail for decades, rebuilt, sold, or converted into civilian cargo ships. Some became hospitals, training vessels, and floating warehouses. The Liberty ship was more than steel and rivets. It was the embodiment of an idea, that a nation could outbuild its enemies, that the line between factory and battlefield could vanish, and that victory could come from the discipline of production. They were not elegant, but they were unstoppable. The ships that fed the world, armed the Allies, and turned industry itself into a weapon. The scale of Liberty ship production changed not only the war, but the nature of industry itself. America's shipyards became the largest construction effort in human history. New yards appeared on both coasts: Richmond, California; Portland, Oregon; Baltimore, Maryland; and Brunswick, Georgia. Each operated like an immense assembly line, welding prefabricated sections together under the glow of floodlights that never dimmed. Kaiser's philosophy was simple: build them faster than they can sink them. Workers came from everywhere. Housewives, farmers, and teachers were trained to weld and rivet. Rosie the Riveter became the symbol of a workforce that was nearly half female. Skilled trades were no longer the bottleneck. Process was. Pre-assembled modules, keels, decks, bulkheads, engine rooms were built in parallel and then joined together in final assembly. Cranes moved entire sections into place in minutes instead of days. Where once a shipyard launched a handful of vessels per year, Liberty yards launched several each week. Training centers taught tens of thousands of welders and engineers the new techniques. Welding replaced riveting because it was faster and cheaper, but it required careful discipline. Faulty welds could crack under stress, and cold weather sometimes split hulls mid-voyage. Engineers solved the problem by redesigning joints, improving steel quality, and reinforcing the hulls with external plates. Failures were studied and corrected within weeks. The industrial feedback loop was as relentless as combat itself. The ships carried everything a global war demanded. Grain, gasoline, ammunition, tanks, aircraft, and medical supplies filled their holds. Convoys of Liberty ships stretched across the oceans, escorted by destroyers and corvettes. They brought supplies to Britain when U-boats threatened starvation, delivered equipment to the Soviet Union through Arctic convoys, and carried reinforcements to the Pacific Islands. Each vessel's capacity, 10,000 tons, meant that a single convoy of 50 ships could equip an entire army division overseas. Their importance reached beyond logistics. The Liberty ship program unified labor, science, and management into a single wartime machine. It demonstrated how government coordination and private industry could achieve miracles under pressure. The U.S. Maritime Commission oversaw design and procurement, while Kaiser managed deadlines with ruthless efficiency. Bonuses were paid for speed, penalties for delay. Propaganda celebrated each launch as a victory. Crowds gathered as ship after ship slid into the water under banners reading, "Full speed ahead for freedom." For the sailors who crewed them, Liberty ships were both lifelines and prisons. They were slow, barely 11 knots, and vulnerable, but they carried the world's hopes on their steel decks. Crews braved torpedoes, storms, and isolation. The vessels lacked luxury. Accommodations were sparse, the noise constant, and the risk omnipresent. Yet morale remained high because every sailor understood the scale of what they served. A floating artery feeding the armies of liberation. By late 1944, Liberty ship production had reached its peak. Newer Victory ships were faster and more durable, but the Liberty remained the workhorse. It had already done its job, overwhelming the enemy through numbers, sustaining allies through endurance, and proving that engineering could win wars as surely as weapons. When Roosevelt called America the arsenal of democracy, the Liberty ship was its clearest proof, a vessel born not of design perfection but of national resolve. When the war ended, the Liberty ship remained a monument to industrial power. More than 2,700 had been built, an achievement that dwarfed every previous shipbuilding effort in history. Many of them continued to serve long after 1945. Hundreds were sold to private companies, converted into freighters, hospital ships, and troop transports. Others became floating warehouses, training ships, or civilian cargo carriers in the rebuilding of Europe and Asia. They hauled grain for the Marshall Plan, transported refugees and carried coal, food, and machinery to shattered cities. Their legacy was practical as well as symbolic. The techniques pioneered in their construction, modular design, prefabrication, and assembly line production, became the blueprint for post-war industry. Shipyards that had once been temporary wartime projects evolved into permanent industrial centers. Welding replaced riveting everywhere. Large-scale manufacturing learned from Liberty Ship Logistics. Build simple, standard units in massive numbers, and let speed replace perfection. The idea spread beyond shipbuilding, influencing aviation, construction, and even computing. In strategic hindsight, Liberty ships were not glamorous weapons, but they were indispensable. Without them, every victory, El Alamein, Normandy, the Pacific Island campaigns, would have stalled for lack of fuel, ammunition, or food. The war's decisive battles were won by men on the front lines, but they were supplied by these slow, gray freighters. A single Liberty ship carried enough fuel to fly a bomber wing for a week, or enough rations to feed an army division for a month. The logistics they enabled turned tactical victories into strategic momentum. The cost was never forgotten. Hundreds of Liberty ships were sunk by submarines, mines, and aircraft. Thousands of merchant sailors lost their lives in the cold seas of the Atlantic and Arctic. Their sacrifice was as crucial as any soldier's. Each ship launched was a gamble against time and danger. One more vessel to bridge the ocean faster than the enemy could destroy it. As the Cold War dawned, the remaining Liberty ships formed the backbone of the U.S. Merchant Reserve Fleet. They were refitted, modernized, and held in readiness for future crises. Some served again during the Korean War, transporting men and materials to another distant conflict. Others lay quietly at anchor, symbols of a different kind of courage, the patience and persistence of production. 2 Liberty ships still sail today as museum vessels, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco and the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore. Their riveted decks and humming engines stand as living artifacts of an age when industry became strategy. Visitors walking their corridors see not luxury but discipline, steel, function, and speed. The Liberty ship embodied a nation's philosophy, that victory could be built, not just fought for. It was proof that the assembly line could be as powerful as the assembly of armies. Every plate welded, every section lifted, and every ship launched carried the same message. That mass production, guided by purpose, could move the world. They were the ships that fed empires, bridged oceans, and outpaced destruction. They were not built to last forever, only long enough to win. And they did,